9 times out of 10, licensed games are often a cheap cash grab. An often rushed, mediocre at best game shoved out the door with a license slapped on top in order to get some easy sales. However, while one property may be popular in one country, it could be practically unheard of in another. So to maximise sales, rather than go to the length of making an all-new game for each region, these frivolous publishers just do a bit of old doki doki panicking on the characters, assuming no one would ever notice. But thanks to the global village that is the internet, their laziness and shrewdness is more apparent than ever. So this episode, we take a look at these repurposed properties, these recycled resources, and these interchanged IPs. As I say, but hello you. I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 Mascot licenses flipped for foreigners. In 1987, Nova Trade Software released alternative world games for various home computers at the time. It was a wacky sports game of sorts that featured such events as a boot toss, sack race, lake vault, walking with pizzas, and slapping an opponent off a boat. Japanese studio Kemco saw this game and decided they wanted to port it to the Nintendo Famicom in Japan. But to spice up the title and make it more appealing to children, they changed all the characters to Donald Duck and Friends by acquiring a license from Disney. It was basically the same game as alternative world games, but now featured the world-famous Angry Duck and his pals. Bringing the game to the West to be played on the Nintendo Entertainment System, however, would be tricky. The problem was that in America, Capcom held exclusive publishing rights to all Disney-related video games on Nintendo. This is why all your favourite NES games with Disney properties like DuckTales and Chip and Dale are made by Capcom. They had an agreement in place that they were the only ones that could release Disney-based games in America for the Nintendo. So, for the Western release of Donald Duck, all the Disney material was stripped out and replaced with characters from the popular Peanuts franchise. Released as Snoopy, the comic dog was now performing stand-in for the famous duck. And as you can see with this side-by-side video here, it's the same game, but with just a change in character sprites. Does swapping the sprites over and calling it an original property work? Well, it never stopped the Sonic ROM hacking community now, did it? The Jetsons Invasion of the Planet's Pirates on the SNES was released in June of 1994 by String Entertainment. It has some unusual but actually quite enjoyable game mechanics. You have a type of vacuum device that you use to traverse the levels and take out enemies. Although if you lived in Europe, you'd never have got to play this, as the Jetsons never got released outside of America. However, Japan would soon get a turn of this game because the Japanese SNES-focused magazine Marukatsu Super Famicom decided that their new mascot Ruka-chan should have a game based on it. The magazine was already going to start running a small manga comic featuring Ruka-chan, and they wanted a game to launch at around the same time. So the magazine's publisher, Kadokawa Shoten, tasked String Entertainment to repurpose their Jetsons game into a game starring Ruka-chan. So, in the summer of 1995, Yokai Buster Ruka no Daiboke was released on the Super Famicom in Japan. Although the gameplay and level layout stayed the same, the graphics got a total overhaul. This extended to the game's bosses as well. Same mechanics used in both, but Ruka's game just looks different. But despite all the changes to the graphics, the protagonist still sucks. Yeah, I'll get the coat. Although the rather messy tale of the Crazy Castle series of games is a topic that's been covered by a fair few other people online, if I didn't at least mention it here, the comments section would be overloaded with people asking why I didn't talk about it. So let's focus on the fourth game in the series, as that's the one that features a really strange sequence of mascot flips. Mickey Mouse 4, The Magical Labyrinth, is the fourth game in the Crazy Castle series of games, and is another title by the Japanese studio Kemco. Like the other games in this series, it's a puzzle/action game in which you have to progress through levels of increasingly difficult challenges that are in between you and the exit of the stage. Even though the first game in the series featured Roger Rabbit, by the time we reached the fourth game, Mickey Mouse was now the mascot for the game. Well, for the Japanese version of the game at least. When bringing the game to the US, Kemco faced the same issue they had with the previous entry on this list. They couldn't use Mickey Mouse in the game, as Capcom were the only ones who could publish Disney-themed Nintendo games. So, what license did Kemco go for to act as the mascot for this game? Something like Bugs Bunny would seem the obvious choice. But no. Kemco chose to use Ghostbusters as a license of choice for this title. Not exactly the first brand that springs to mind when you think of a puzzle labyrinth video game. It's still the same game though. Outside of a sprite swap, the only real other change is that the Ghostbusters theme song has now been thrown in here in places. But like I said, other than that, it's still pretty much the same game. Although it is possible that Kemco had other plans for this version of the game, as hidden in the game's code are assets belonging to the Kid Clown series. Now, you would have thought that this American release with Ghostbusters would have been fine to put out in Europe too. This, alas, was not the case, and by the time the game reached European shores, the Ghostbusters had been removed from the title and replaced by Garfield and Friends. But even though this was now the third mascot's change, the actual gameplay was still identical to how it was in its Japanese release as Mickey Mouse 4. However, this is where the tale of Crazy Castle 4 moves from the bizarre to the outright shady. 2 years before Crazy Castle 4, a studio called Travelling Bits put out a game called PP Hammer and His Pneumatic Weapon on home computers. The two games share far more than just a passing resemblance, as they feature the exact same gameplay structure and mechanics. And in this side by side, you can even see how this level is pretty much the same in both games. Gunnar Leader, who was the developer of PP Hammer, stated on Twitter that he had never had any relationship with Kemco, and that they had just completely ripped off his game. So Disney has managed to become involved in a situation where someone has had their original work completely ripped off. So nothing new there then. Hello you. If you're enjoying Fact Hunt, why not subscribe to be first to see the latest episodes? And if you already are subbed, click that bell and choose all to make sure you're always informed. Super Troll Islands was inflicted upon the world in the springtime of 1994 for the Super Nintendo. An awful game released at a time to cash in on the plastic troll toy fad at the time. This title was a simple colour the level in to win video game and didn't score very highly upon release. Obviously the studio behind the game, Millennium Interactive, were targeting as a very young demographic, because most people will find the over-the-top cuteness of the game absolutely vomit-inducing, and the troll imagery used in between the levels is something you'd end up describing to a therapist one day. Unfortunately, this was not the last time we'd see this game, as the BBC asked Millennium Interactive to create a game featuring the horrific character Mr. Blobby. For those still living blissfully unaware of what Mr. Blobby is, allow me to make your life just that little bit worse.
No, stop. No. I'm sorry, I made it clear.
Mr. Blobby was a pink-suited, thing that starred on a 90s British Saturday night primetime family show called Noel's House Party. He was destructive, manic, and viewers loved him. He was so popular that the BBC who aired the show commissioned a home computer game. Millennium Interactive got the job and gave Mr. Blobby the treatment he deserved. They just rehashed Super Troll Islands and changed the main character to Mr. Blobby. It's more like a demake because Mr. Blobby was created for weaker home computer hardware than Super Troll Islands, as that was on the SNES. The really surprising part in all of this is what followed. You'd expect a studio like this regurgitate some more shovelware before fading into obscurity. But actually, Millennium Interactive morphed into Sony Computer Entertainment Cambridge, and then later morphed again into Gorilla Cambridge. As a Sony studio, they put out titles like Medieval, Primal, Killzone Mercenary, and PSVR game Riggs, before being shut down in 2017. The final game on our list is Baby T-Rex for the Nintendo Game Boy by Beam Software. It's a fairly fast-moving platform game that has you avoiding enemies and traps while you'll make your way to the end of the level. It's your typical early 90s platform game which didn't do anything to move the needle in terms of the genre. However, the publisher for the game had hopes that they could release the game worldwide, and they would do this by adapting the game to suit different regions across the globe. The first port of call was to the land of the rising apple pie by acquiring a license for the movie We're Back, A Dinosaur Story. The main sprite was changed for the US version, as too was the title screen, but pretty much everything else was left how it was. From here they went on to release the game in Sweden, and for the localisation there, Beam Software picked up the rights to use the kids' cartoon character Bamsa. Again, just a sprite and title screen change is all that really sets this version apart from the others. Next on the publisher's hit list was their homeland, Australia. So when the game was released down under, Beam Software acquired to use the children's TV puppet Aggro, who was quite possibly the most Australian thing you could imagine.
Look at this.
What's it called?
Well, he doesn't have a name. Good luck troll. It's called a good luck troll.
All right, yes.
Have a look at him.
Yep.
See? There he is. I'll just turn him around. Look at him.
Geez, I reckon my hair would go like that if I had a pencil up my arse as well.
Just like the other regional releases, it's just a sprite swap and a change to the title screen, really. Now, consistent recycling of the game ended with Aggro Saw, but the UK came very close to seeing its own variant of the game. It was going to feature Ed the Duck, who was a puppet from the show Interims of Children's BBC. The game was finished, although let's be honest, it's not like a lot of hard work had to go into it, and it even got as far as being reviewed in gaming magazines. But had to be pulled at the very last minute when the TV presenter Andy Peters...
This one is of the evil Shredder when he attacks. That comes from Larry Bundy, yeah, get him off, and he lives in Northwood in Middlesex.
...who worked on screen with Ed, left the show and caused the whole game to get scrapped. This version of the game stayed locked away for decades, until those fun-loving pranksters over at 4chan hacked Nintendo and leaked a ton of unreleased games. And within that treasure trove was Ed the Duck. Beam Software would go on to reuse the game engine of Baby T-Rex to create a different licensed game, that's being Tasmania 2, on the Game Boy. Then later, the whole Baby T-Rex IP was reworked, and out of it came Radical Rex, which was met with a collective meh. Whoever said recycling was good for the environment? Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified, and be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.